2,000 years have passed since that fateful Easter week. And yet every time you recite the Apostles' Creed, you invoke my name and you announce to the world that your Jesus suffered and was crucified under Pontius Pilate. You have cast me as the villain of the one who turned your Messiah over to be killed, but you turn a blind eye to the political storm and to the delicate balance that I had to keep between Caesar and the Jews. You speak of justice as if it were easy, courage as if it came without any consequence. I am remembered as the spineless judge who killed your God, but you know nothing of the pressures that I faced. That ends today. I am here not to amuse you or entertain you, and I don't care if you like me or not. I'm here to tell you about the role that Pontius Pilate played and why I did what I did. To truly understand me, you have to go back to my upbringing. I grew up in Tusculum, the hills just north of Rome. My family, the Ponti, we were of the equestrian order, second only to senatorial. As far back as I can remember, my parents, they were grooming me to go into politics. Because we were not of the aristocracy, that meant that my pathway, it would have to go through the army, which was fine with me. After education, turned 19, I enlisted. After basic training, I was sent to Northern Europe to serve under General Germanicus. I was very good at my craft and quickly rose through the ranks. After 15 years of serving in its imperial army and stepping over a few friends or two, I was given a significant and major promotion. I was made tribune of the Praetorian Guard. This Rome's military elite police would be responsible to protect Emperor Tiberius himself and maintain order in our great capital of Rome. My commanding officer was none other than Sejanus, longtime family friend and my mentor. His influence in Rome was second only to Tiberius, which meant that it was rumored that possibly, maybe, he would become in line for the throne. Sejanus, he was my gateway to power. He was the one that could open doors to the advancement of my career. I was summoned to Imperial Palace. Late one afternoon, Sejanus, his docket was full. He was busy. After a very quick embrace, he got right to the point. Pontio, I meet with Tiberius in a short while, so let me be brief. I've just received resignation of Valerius Gratus, the governor of Judea. When I meet with the emperor, among other things, I plan to recommend, to suggest that you become the new prefect of Judea. He could see in my face the shock, the surprise. He said, Pontio, you are perfect for the job. You are firm. You won't take any of that nonsense of the Jews. You are disciplined. What do you think? What did I think? Mind you, it was not like being commissioned to Syria or to Egypt, but this was very prestigious, and it was everything my father had dreamed for me. Mind you, I will have to have your commission approved by Tiberius, but let me handle that, added Sejanus with a smile. Now get out of here, Pontio. Begin to prepare. You leave in 3 months. As a dedicated, spiritual, devout man, the following morning, I burned incense and I prayed to the gods to seek their favor, to thank them for this blessing in my life. Don't you know, we Romans, we were deeply spiritual people. We worshipped our divine emperor, a host of gods and goddesses, but we were also religiously tolerant. We would allow for the worship of regional, local gods so long as it didn't cause problems for the local. That would be my challenge with the Jews. Their religious ideas, convictions were perplexing. Let me explain. They actually worshipped an invisible God. They required sacrifice for the forgiveness of sins. And they believed in this coming liberator. What did they call it? A Messiah, they would call him. one that would free them from oppression. And by that, I think they meant us, the Romans. 2 weeks after my commission was approved, I met with Ananias Rufus, the former governor of Judea. He was an elderly man who had retired in Rome. He told me that with its 7 million Jews, Judea, it had very significant, important trade routes and was key to the protection of our eastern provinces. I pretended to listen to him for what was a very long-winded explanation on his part of how to govern Judea. But my mind, it was consumed with other things, like making things right with Claudia Procula, my fiancée. Our families, they had arranged a marriage when she was 13 years old. And yet in this last year of living in Rome and being together, we had fallen in love. A surprising but very pleasant development. And yet, for some reason, I kept delaying the wedding. I don't know. You know what they say, marriage is like a phone call in the middle of the night. First you get the ring, and then you wake up. But it wasn't that way with Procula. She was elegant, intelligent. She proved to be a very worthy advisor. Her mother, she was not happy with us, with the rushed wedding and the fact that I would be taking her daughter halfway around the world. But there we were, 2 weeks after the wedding, sailing on the Trident of Neptune, a large ship that would take us across the Mediterranean to our home for the next 10 years of our life, Caesarea Maritima. Oh, this coastal city, it was far more impressive than what we could have ever imagined. With its marbled temples and its Roman baths and its beautiful theaters. Our home was a Greco-Roman mansion complete with tropical gardens, private pool, and administrative offices for me to conduct business. We were very pleased with our new home, but it quickly became apparent that my new job, it may not be as easy or fulfilling as I had otherwise thought. As governor of Judea, I had supreme authority over the entire province. And yet the success of my job depended on navigating 2 very complex political relationships. The first was Caiaphas, the high priest, politically driven, very powerful, and wickedly shrewd. Then there was the Tetrarch of Galilee, one by the name of Herod Antipas, who I met with right away after arriving. Compared to Caiaphas, he was an imbecile. And I might add, very much so like his father, Herod the Great. Oh, Herod the Great, he was a master builder. But he was insane. He had murdered his wife, 3 of his sons, and at one point in time had killed hundreds of Jewish infants in an attempt to rid the land of one of these so-called messiahs. I had to meet with Herod Antipas on a regular basis because I was concerned for Judea and the possible civil unrest. I believed we were undermanned and under-resourced. We only had 3,000 troops at our disposal, and should the Jews decide to mount a well-organized rebellion, it would be a problem. The Jewish leaders, they seemed intent on knowing this vulnerability and determined to exploit it at every turn, as I was determined to stamp my authority on Judea. And stamp my authority I did when I sent the Augustan unit to Jerusalem. This unit, they had been given privilege to have the colors and the image of Tiberius on their banners. I did not know this would be considered provocation. I did not know that they would consider it to be one of the violations of their holy 10 commandments. How did I know? Word got out of my offense, and influential Jews encouraged a crowd to surround my home in Caesarea in protest. I could have recalled the Augustan unit, but the words of Sejanus, my mentor, kept ringing in my ears. Be firm, Pontio, be firm. So I did not back down. I would not recall Augustan unit. I had decided that It was more important to me to be firm than to be kind. Understand? But I ordered my men to surround the crowd after 6 days of protest. I was fed up. I told them to unsheath their swords. I threatened violence. You know what the Jews did? They fell to their knees. They bared their necks. They preferred to die than to have their holy city of Jerusalem desecrated. I had gravely underestimated their conviction and their resolve. Oh, I needed to be firm, but I was also called to maintain the peace. And if I followed through on my threat, it would just inflame the population. And so I made up some excuse about it being all a test. I swallowed my pride and I recalled the Augustan unit back to Caesarea. I was embarrassed and I looked for my opportunity to exact political revenge. Thank goodness that came just a few months later when I went to Jerusalem. I would make the trip to Jerusalem 3 times a year. From Caesarea to Jerusalem, typically during the high holy Jewish feasts, because I believed that the most volatile time for Roman rule in Judea occurred during these feasts. They were not merely religious celebrations. No, they were times of remembrance, times of defiance, connected to stories of their God in the past who had risen up and freed them from pagan oppression. What the Jews were doing during these festivities is they were saying what God did in the past, we want Him to do again now and free us from the pagans that are oppressing us now. And by that they meant us. So we would march to Jerusalem to strengthen the garrison, knowing that unrest was possible at any moment. It was during one of these trips to Jerusalem, during the feast of Passover, that a recurring problem was brought to my attention. During the feast, the pilgrims that would come to Jerusalem, they would make population of Jerusalem more than double, which put a strain on the water supply. You see, my horses barely had enough to drink. My kitchen staff barely enough to prepare meals. Jerusalem needed a better source of water. And so I met with some of my engineers, some of my architects, and they recommended and suggested I build an aqueduct. It was a brilliant idea. The Roman Empire, we were known for bringing innovation and advancements to backward nations. Now I just had to figure out how to pay for it. It wasn't the right time to raise the taxes. So you could understand how thrilled I was when I found a financial loophole that would work to my advantage. Who knew that as prefect of Judea, I had the right to dip into temple treasury and use those funds, should I, quote, deem it necessary for the good of the people. Oh, I can't tell you how exhilarating it was to call chief priests to my office and announce to them that their treasury would pay for my aqueduct. Watching them swerve gave me undescribable joy. It was the perfect political revenge for the Augustan unit affair that they had put me through. You know, what I was doing was highly unorthodox. It would be the equivalent of you dipping into the church savings account to pay for a brand new sports car and luxury golf vacation to Hawaii for your pastor. Which now when you say it out loud, it actually sounds like a very good idea. Should pray about that. I returned to Jerusalem the following year, very interested to see the progress on the aqueduct. I was also curious to see how the citizens of Jerusalem would respond now that they knew that I had dipped into their sacred treasury. Let me just say that the following morning I was awoken from the praetorium with a large crowd that had met outside in the piazza. After breakfast, I went out to my balcony to speak to them, but not before I had some of my men mingle amongst the crowd in civilian clothing. I said to them, you know, the aqueduct, it will help you. It will help Jerusalem, but they would not listen. They began to shout insults to me. You know, I remember very vividly that morning, I had decided, normally I would wear my toga like today during political, diplomatic conversations, but that day I wore my Roman armor. As prefect, I was first and foremost a soldier, second a diplomat. I ordered the crowd to disperse, but they would not listen to me. They thought I was bluffing. So I gave the signal. And when it was all done, 50 Jews lay on the ground dead. My mentor, Sejanus, would be proud of me. My wife, Claudia, she was very upset. When I returned to Caesarea, she had heard of my actions. She didn't talk to me for an entire week. This was not easy for me. I did not have many friends in Judea. I had Claudia and I had a few Roman officers, but there weren't that many of them. Most of the men under my command were non-Roman, of a mixed Syrian Jewish descent. There was one, a man by the name of Cornelius from the Italian regiment. He is someone I developed a close bond and friendship with. As it turned out, one of the Jewish maidservants, she took a liking to Cornelius, and my wife, ever eager to play the matchmaker, she wove her magic, and they got married. I did become concerned that Cornelius, he embraced the Jewish faith. He professed belief in one true God. This bothered me, but also his wit, his humor, his intelligence, his sensibilities, these were character qualities I appreciated in him. Which is why I typically gave Cornelius some of the more sensitive assignments. Like when I sent him to Galilee to look into the talk of a new Messiah. You do know I had dealt with many Messiahs. You know this, right? There was Simon the slave. There was Ephrangis the shepherd. There was Judas the Galilean. And now, Yeshua Hanrossi, the carpenter from Nazareth. We Romans, we had good spy networks on all potential troublemakers, and anytime these messiahs would rise up against the Roman rule, we would quickly liquidate them and kill them. This Yeshua, or Jesus as you would call him, he was drawing large crowds, speaking of revolution, speaking of kingdom. It was becoming apparent to me that I would have to liquidate him as well. But then Cornelius, he returned with a report. He told me that while Jesus, yes, he spoke of revolution, it was not revolution with weapons or insurrection. No, it was more, what did he call it? Spiritual revolution, inner transformation. Strange, really. There were rumors that he was doing miracles, healing people, feeding thousands with hardly nothing, calming the elements, the storms. It became evident after speaking to Cornelius that Yeshua Hanrossi would not be a military threat. So I let it go. I forgot about it. I thought it would all go away. Little did I know that Cornelius, and over time my wife, became deeply interested in this man. In the year 32 AD, events occurring in Rome shook the Roman Empire and reverberated throughout the Mediterranean. This was no ordinary crisis. No, it threatened my very own life. And more importantly to you, it had a direct result on what I did with your Jesus months later. Tiberius had accused my mentor Sejanus of treason before the Senate. He presented evidence of a calculated plot where Sejanus was trying to exert the throne from Tiberius. Within 1 hour of the evidence coming forth, Sejanus was executed by strangulation. His body was dragged through the streets of Rome on a hook, and then his corpse was thrown in the Tiber River. What followed was a brutal purge. As mobs took to the street, they killed all of his family and all of his close associates. Now the only question would be, would Rome remember my friendship with him? Remember that I had been his star pupil, his protege. My relationship with Sejanus, once an asset, was now a liability. 1 month after his death, a courier arrived from Rome with a message from Tiberius. This was it. This message, it would determine my fate. As I read, I saw how emperor, he made association with Tiberius, with Sejanus, but it did not seem that Tiberius would hold me accountable for Sejanus' treason. He did order me to discontinue the anti-Jewish directives and policies Sejanus had given me. Instead, I was to work with the Jews, placate them if necessary. For now, my life had been spared. But it was clear that my administration would have to go in a new direction. Several months later, again, Passover came around, and I again made preparations to go to Jerusalem. But this time, my wife insisted on going with me. Why? I did not understand. Our mansion in Caesarea was much more comfortable than the praetorium that I stayed in Jerusalem. Why? And besides, with all the tension in the city, she could not go to the market shopping. What followed were several weeks of persuasion, coaxing, and even a tear or two. She was very skilled at doing what every wife is able to do, to change her husband's unalterable decision. She did not disclose her true motive for wanting to go, because if she had, it would have ended the affair. Some of her maids, they had been telling her of the, what did you call them? The parables of Jesus, these stories. She had become interested. And when Cornelius told her that Jesus would certainly be in Jerusalem for Passover, she was determined to be there. It was Claudia. As we approached Jerusalem, she pointed out the very strange scene on Mount of Olives. A large crowd had gathered. They were cheering, they were screaming, they were waving palm branches, their sign of national independence, as somebody was coming into the city. I was briefed later that somebody was none other than Jesus of Nazareth. They had hailed him as the Son of David, a loaded title should he choose to claim to be the heir of the Jewish king. It was becoming apparent to me, this Jesus, he was heading down the road of confrontation. If he stayed in the political arena, I would step in on behalf of Rome. If he stayed in the religious arena, he was certain to clash with Lord Caiaphas and the Jewish council. He had embarrassed them publicly. He had referred to them as whitewashed tombs, which means that on the outside they look respectable. They look clean, but on the inside they are dirty, decaying, and dying. I've come to realize since then that many of us are more like that than we care to admit. Presentable on the outside. We have it together. But on the inside, empty and troubled. It takes a lot of courage to admit that, even more to do something about it. Later, the following evening, we had dinner with Herod Antipas, who was in town for Passover. I did not want to go. But to turn down his invitation would have been breach of protocol. Interesting and ironic that we had dinner and just a few blocks away, another group was having dinner with their rabbi, Yeshua Hanrosi. When we finished dinner, we headed back to Pretoria. My wife, she immediately went to bed. I had meeting with Jewish priests. They needed my help in arresting Jesus. Apparently that day he had caused commotion in people. My men at the Antonia fortress that overlooks temple, they had seen this. They had already told me about this. So I was inclined to help them. The arrest would happen that night in a garden nearby. I thought taking Jesus into custody would calm everything, but it didn't. It made things worse. Almost immediately after the meeting, I went to my bedroom chambers, only to find my wife Claudia shaking and in tears. She had been awoken by a nightmare. A nightmare she didn't know about what, but she thought maybe about Jesus of Nazareth. I just held her, consoled her until she fell back asleep. The following morning, Thursday, I was up early. I was hearing cases. I was looking at evidence. I was making pronouncements and judgments when now a servant came in and said that the Jewish chief priests wanted to see me. They needed their help with Jesus. Again, they needed my help with Jesus. Now what? I was going to make them wait their turn, like everyone else. But then the servant explained to me that the trial was already over. They needed merely for me to confirm the sentence that they had made. They were asking for the death sentence. The death sentence? Why? I was so pleased that Claudia was not there to hear that. I decided to meet with them.
He claims to be our king and is whipping up the crowds into a rebellion that could tear Jerusalem apart. Caesar would not be pleased.
His name?
Jesus of Nazareth.
You better not be wasting my time. I'll see the prisoner. So, tell me who you are. Are you the King of the Jews?
Are you asking? Or is it a question coming from others?
Are you a king? That's what your own people and chief priest tell me you claim to be.
My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight my arrest. My kingdom is from another place.
You are a king, then?
You say that I am a king. I have been born and come into the world to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me.
Truth? What is truth?
That's him. The man I saw in the dream, that's him.
They want him crucified.
You can't.
They say he could start a revolution.
You mustn't.
If I don't, Caiaphas will blame any rebellion on me. Caesar will see it as my failure. He's warned me once, he's not going to warn me again. I'll be finished. We'll be finished.
I had heard so much about Jesus, and there he was, bound, powerless, disheveled, bruised. I had much experience with criminals. Typically, they were begging, bartering, cursing. But not this Jesus. No, he had no hostility, no anger, no anxiety. No, he just, it's like he knew something that I didn't know. He was calm. Claudia's nightmare had perplexed me, had unsettled me. I needed clarity. But Jesus, he was not defending himself. He wasn't even answering the questions I was asking him. It's frustrating. It was almost as if he wanted it. Clearly, he had provoked Caiaphas. He made the mess of the temple. But this was not criminal. I returned to the Jewish delegation, and I did what I thought was a brilliant tactical move. I said, I understand that Jesus, he is a Galilean, which technically falls under the jurisdiction of the Tetrarch of Galilee, Herod Antipas, who I know happens to be in town. Go see him. I was hoping that Antipas would settle the situation. But like I told you, he was an imbecile. In his cowardice and lunacy, he had turned it into mockery. He had dressed Jesus like a king. He had sent him back to me within 35 minutes. He was back in front of me. No resolution, no suggestion. The problem back in my lap. So, I was governor. I didn't see anything wrong with him. The Tetrarch of Galilee didn't see anything wrong with him. So I decided, I went back, I found the Jewish delegation. Now they were standing amongst the growing crowd in the plaza just outside Praetorium. I stood and I say, I, Pontius Pilate, prefect of Judea, and representative of his imperial majesty, declare Jesus of Nazareth not guilty. The defendant, he is free to go. This court is adjourned. No sooner has I spoken those words that a young Jewish scribe, he stood, he pointed at Jesus and he yelled, Istele! Crucify him. And then, like a tidal wave of rage, it spread throughout the crowd. And then in one voice, they began to roar, Crucify him! Crucify him! Why did they hate him so much? I thought maybe they didn't want justice. Maybe they wanted blood. That's what I would do. I would give them blood. So I had Jesus stripped and beaten. When they brought him back to me, it was clear that my man had gone too far. He was viciously bloodied. Looking at him reminded me why they called Roman scourging the halfway death, because after the beating, men were halfway dead. We Romans, we used a whip called a flagrum. It had sharp pieces of bone and pieces of lead woven in. It was intended to rip the skin off of a man's back. Surely this would satisfy the crowd. But it didn't. They insisted. We have a law, and the law says that he must die because he has claimed to be the Son of God. Wait, Son of God? Son, I have not heard this before. This is new evidence. How had I not heard this? I had a cold chill that ran down my spine. And I turned to Jesus and spoke in low voice that only he could hear. Is it true? Do you claim to be the Son of God? Jesus, don't you know that I have the power to free you or to convict you? Then his eyes looked up at me and he says, you have no power over me, if only given to you by the will of my Father. You know, it was at that moment I realized how upset I was that none of his disciples were there. None of his followers were defending him. No, I was his sole defense attorney. And then, as if almost on cue, my wife Claudia, who'd been watching from her balcony, she sent me a message. She had a knack to find the most inopportune moments to need my attention. You know, husbands, what it's like. The note, it read, Pontio, I'm haunted by this innocent, righteous man. Pontio, please do the right thing. I was trying to do the right thing, but I was slowly being backed into a corner. I had one more move, one more card I could play that might stem the tide. There was a Passover custom where I would release a prisoner. And so I gave the crowd the option. They could either have released Jesus the preacher or a criminal I had in custody by the name of Barabbas. I couldn't believe my ears when the crowd, they requested release of Barabbas. I should have known better. Did you know that people in that crowd that day, some of them had hailed Jesus less than a week earlier as the Messiah, and now they wanted him dead? It gave me a small window into the hypocrisy of some of Jesus' followers. You follow him, you obey him when it suits you, when it's convenient. But when sacrifice is required, when there might be consequence, when it's not easy or convenient, then you turn your back on him. You call that faith. I still refuse to budge. He was innocent. Until Rabbi Annas stepped forward to deliver the kill shot. He said, Lord Prefect, in a very calm voice, he said, we know that Emperor Tiberius has instructed you to honor our holy customs, to maintain peace at all cost. If you let this man go, you mock our holy faith. If you let this man go, there will be violence. If you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar. Check, mate. Don't you see? Don't you understand? Call it bribery, political bribery, or a direct threat. The words of Rabbi Annas could only be understood one way. If you don't crucify Jesus, the Sanhedrin, we will send delegation to Rome to speak to Tiberius about you. And after Sejanus' affair, I could not risk that. They had forced my hand, and they had won. I took a deep breath, and I convicted Jesus of Nazareth to be crucified that morning with 2 other rebels. I was a proud Roman, but crucifixion was something I was hoping the Roman Empire would one day abolish. We would drive nails through the hands of a man, through his ankles. We would hang him on a Roman cross. Over time, the weight of his body would constrict his airways until he would die of suffocation. We didn't want to just kill a man, no. We wanted to destroy him inch by inch, to take away his humanity, his dignity. The goal was to make the agony stretch for as long as possible, for hours, sometimes as days we could make it last, until he was in so much excruciating pain he couldn't even cry out. See, you don't understand. Crucifixion was not intended only for punishment. It was Roman theater carved into the skin of a man for the eyes of the living, to put fear and terror in you and to show you the cost of defying the Roman Empire. The empire would make sure that even the idea of independence, of freedom or defiance would die on the Roman cross. I was exhausted by the events of the morning. I made my way to my living quarters in the Praetorium, only to bump into my wife, Claudia. She had tears in her eyes. Pontio, we will live to regret this. He was different. He was chosen by the gods. Please, Claudia, I don't want to talk about it anymore. I don't want to think about it anymore. I snapped at her. Told her I would be having my meal alone by the pool where I drank far too much, trying to drown out that I had been bullied by the crowd into a decision I didn't want to make. I didn't tell you before, but just before I gave the order to have him crucified, in one final act of, call it self-absolution, I washed my hands symbolically in front of the crowd. I don't know, my way to deny my responsibility, to push the role that I had played onto someone else. How convenient it would be if we could all do that. Oh no, I understand. You weren't there. But your Holy Scriptures say very clearly that the fingerprints of your sin were all over that cross. It's not just my fault that he dies, it's yours as well. I made my way to the study where I continued to drink, and from there I watched the very strange events happening in Jerusalem that day. The winds, the darkness in the middle of the day, the earthquake. Less than an hour after the earthquake, some of his followers came requesting the body, which I gave to them, of course. I was pleased, so grateful that the rest of the weekend it was quiet, it was slow. I did notice on the northwest side of Jerusalem a growing crowd of Jews. I thought they were just looking at the destruction made by the earthquake. But then on Monday morning, early, I was briefed. I was briefed about a story that was spreading through Jerusalem like wildfire. I called my tribune. He was the highest ranking military official in Jerusalem. I wanted to see him now.
Tribune. Pilate, son.
He's gone.
The Nazarene.
Of course, the Nazarene. His tomb is stone empty.
Who brought this news? The guards?
Your guards are missing. Some simpleton reported it. Who did you put on the detail? I want them found and lashed to death, preferably.
Let me investigate.
Well, that will be helpful before Caiaphas and his pack of raving Jews show up here.
Too late. Tribune?
Thus, Jerusalem was all abuzz with the news. I prefer to say the rumor that this Jesus had risen from the dead. The rest of the week, I met several times with the Jewish council. I pressed the executioners at the crucifixion site to assure me that he was actually dead when they brought him down from the cross. I interviewed the soldiers that we had posted at the tomb precisely to avoid these kind of tales. No one had any answers. No one had any explanation. Well, they did. But it's not answers that I could accept. And then as the days went by, sightings of this risen Christ continued to mount, which just emboldened his followers. They had gone from being afraid, hiding, thinking they would be the next to die, and now they were preaching about the risen Christ in the temple courtyard. Now might be the time to ask you, do you really think my Roman soldiers were that stupid and inept to allow Galilean fishermen to rob the body in the middle of the night? Please! And in what world do you live in that the Roman authorities or the Jewish authorities had anything to gain from hiding the body, as some said? No. That tomb, it was secure, it was sealed, it was guarded. And somehow, it ended empty. Something happened in my city 2,000 years ago that I could not control. Nobody could control. I wanted to get to the bottom of it, but I was tired. I went to my home in Caesarea, and from that day forward, I did everything that I could to forget the memory of Jesus of Nazareth. In a strange twist of fate, those closest to me, Claudia, Cornelius, they leaned into the story even more. Who would have known that my days as prefect of Judea were coming to an end? Less than 6 months after the crucifixion affair with Jesus, there was a Samaritan uprising, and when it was all done, 300 Samaritans were dead. The Samaritan Council sent an official delegation to my immediate supervisor in Syria, telling him and accusing me of abuse of power and excessive force. Within 1 week, I was given the orders to leave Judea, to go back to Rome, to appear before Tiberius Caesar, and give an account for my actions. 10 years of my life, over. I remember the last night we were in Caesarea Maritima, Claudia and I, we had a meal. We began to reminisce about our time there, the friends we had made, the projects we had completed, the positive contributions we had made to the empire. We also spoke of some of the more difficult times, like my decision about Jesus of Nazareth. I was still wrestling with the truth of who he was and what had happened.
Quid est veritas, Claudia? Eam audis, eam cognoscis quando dicitur.
Veritas. That was our word for truth. My political truth? Before I arrived in Rome, Emperor Tiberius died, and the new Caesar, one named Caligula, he dismissed all charges, but he had me also retired from public service. My financial truth is that I was given a very generous government retirement package, and we retired in the villa just outside of Rome. My spiritual truth, I continued to try to put the events of that Passover week behind me, to forget them, but I just couldn't. You know what's rather strange, humorous even, those Christians, those people of the way as they were called, they eventually started having meetings in and around Rome. Did you know that? My wife Claudia, she went to some of these meetings. And after that, I can only say that she became a more incredible woman than I had ever known. I remember one day she looked at me in the eyes and she said, "Pontio, I have accepted and embraced the truth about Jesus." You know, eventually every single one of us will have to answer life's great questions about God, about the afterlife, about Jesus, who he was, why he died, and what happened with that empty tomb. I don't know that I ever came to be able to answer these questions for myself. I think as I look back, I was afraid of the answers that I would find. My name is Pontius Pilate, and I've come to terms with the role that I played in the death of Jesus of Nazareth. The only question left to answer is this: have you? Hail Caesar, farewell.